Section 2 of Chapter 5 is on sleep. This is one of, I believe, the students' favorite sections because sleep is such an important um, thing in your day to day life. It's usually something that you're not getting enough of. And so it's something that a lot of students have a lot of questions about, and therefore we're going to take some time and go through this thoroughly. So, on average, we spend about 25 years of our life asleep. So, about a third of our lives are actually spent asleep. So, it's something that we do a lot more than I think a lot of people even understand that we do. We know we're supposed to sleep a lot, but I don't think it's as understood how critical it is to our day to day functioning. The interesting thing about sleep is that sleep isn't something that's very well understood by researchers at this point. There's been a lot of people who have asked, like, why do we sleep in general? If we're asleep, we are more vulnerable to attack from predators or from enemies. We are not finding food. We're not propagating the species. We're kind of just like in like reboot mode while we're asleep. And why would evolution have made us have to sleep so much? And especially, like, I mean, every animal, every living thing, even down to plants and bacteria and fungus, we all have a sleep cycle. So there are periods of rest and periods of activity that we all go through. And the best reason that scientists who study sleep can give for why we sleep is that because we get sleepy. Like, every animal gets tired and eventually needs this period of rest. But why was our body designed to do that? And so that's something that we're going to kind of explore in this chapter. Um, the interesting thing when we are asleep, though, is that we're not completely unresponsive. So moms especially, they'll tell you like they can hear their child whimper or cough or sneeze down the hall, even if they were dead asleep. But at the same time, we can ignore a jet or a siren that goes by the window. We're more likely to be awoken if our name is said than another name or other words. And we can actually be taught to avoid a shock by touching a switch each time a sound is, like a tone is sounded. So we can actually learn in our sleep to turn off this shock by hitting a button. It's kind of the same features that work with our alarm clocks. If you've ever had your alarm clock go off and you've turned it off and gone back to sleep and totally didn't remember it, and you wake up maybe an hour later, like, oh crap, I'm going to be really late, that's part of that same kind of functionality. Have any of you guys done that where you've actually like switched off your alarm and gone back to sleep, or hit snooze and gone back to sleep and had no idea? That's essentially the same function. Now, if you're a person who can't be easily woken up by alarm clocks, there's a bunch of really cool things out there for you. There are apps that have like super loud alarms. You can buy specialty alarms. But there's also ones that make you stand up on a mat with your full body weight before it'll turn off. There's ones that will make you do a math problem or solve a puzzle before it will turn off. There's other ones that have like little wheels on them. They're called, I think they're called Wheelie or Clocky or something like that. They will roll off your nightstand and roll away from you. There's also ones that have like a little like laser target, and you have to like shoot the target with the alarm clock. It's a whole thing. There's a bunch of really interesting new alarms out there. There's even ones that are attached to a light, and it will slowly increase the illumination before you need to wake up. So it's a little bit more natural and not quite as jarring to go from a pitch black room to awake. So check those out if you're a person who struggles to wake up with your alarm clock. While we are asleep, we really don't have any complex skills. Again, you're not going to be doing math problems in your sleep, which is one of the reasons why those apps that attach to your alarm work really nicely. They'll actually make you mentally become more awake before it will turn off. Good sleep has a whole host of benefits, including improving memory for something that's learned the day before. So one of the best things to do for studying is you study maybe an hour or two before bed, and then you give yourself a break, and then you go to sleep, and your brain will actually learn that information better. And we're going to be talking about how that process and what's called memory consolidation in this chapter and in chapter 7. So our biological need for sleep. So we have a series of biological rhythms, and these are any repeating cycles of biological activity, such as sleeping and waking cycles and changes in bodily temperature. And these cycles can't be ignored. They just happen naturally. So there are times of the day that you're going to be more tired and times you're going to be more awake. Same thing with your body temperature. It changes throughout the day. There's also changes in cortisol levels and a variety of different hormones in your body that will kind of signal different things to happen at different times of the day. How long can someone go without sleep? Anything more than 4 days, and it becomes very dangerous. We're going to talk about some of the consequences of sleep loss in a second, but the world record is 11 days. There's actually an article about this on Canvas as well as a podcast you guys should check out. When the guy finally did go to sleep after 11 days, he only needed 14 hours of sleep to recover. You would think if you've missed, your 8 hours over 11 days, that's 88 hours, you would need, at least 2 days minimum to make it up. But actually, it only took 14 hours, took less than a day of sleep, and he felt recovered afterwards. Sleep deprivation is being prevented from getting your desired or needed amounts of sleep. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are in that right now. I'm sure with the stress of school and extracurricular activities, sports, family obligations, and things like that, you're probably pretty sleep deprived. And I hope this chapter will help re-emphasize the necessity of getting to bed on time. So some of the consequences of sleep loss include slurred speech, reduced concentration, poor memory, can't recall the name of common objects, trembling hands, inattention, irritability, increased pain sensitivity, and discomfort. So a lot of this just sounds like adolescence, but also a lot of adolescents are sleep deprived. So you add those two things together, and it's a recipe for disaster, especially when it comes to relationships and your school and academic success. So getting the right amount of sleep is incredibly important for your success, especially in this program. Hypersomnia is excessive daytime sleepiness, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are suffering from. It's actually more common during adolescence. This is due in part to the rapid physical and hormonal changes. One of the things that happens in adolescence is that your biological clock begins to kind of get pushed later. So you want to fall asleep later, so maybe not till midnight, 1 a.m. is when you really are feeling tired, and you want to sleep till 10 or 11 a.m. But of course, society doesn't agree with that and wants you to go to bed early so that you can wake up early so you can get to school and start school at 8 a.m. There have been some schools that have actually shifted towards later schedules for their high schoolers and started elementary schools earlier to kind of counterbalance that, because typically they have to use the same buses to move all the students back and forth. So they have to kind of stagger times. So they'll start elementary schools earlier when, younger kids aren't as affected by this. They can get up earlier. And then high schoolers will start maybe 9 or 10 a.m. Of course, then the school day gets pushed later in the afternoon as well. My school district when I was in high school actually considered this, but they had a lot of pushback from parents. I think unfairly. I think they made the wrong decision, and I think they gave in to some stupid pressures. But some of the concerns was that sports typically start, like practices and games start after school. It would push them back even later, or they'd have to do them in the morning, which would throw off people's schedules. Parents wouldn't be able to attend as much. And then one of the major concerns was childcare for younger students. So typically, high schoolers get off earlier, they get home, and that way by the time the elementary school child comes home, then the older child's there to keep an eye on them. If the younger kid is off and the teenager comes home afterwards, then there would be a time where that younger child is not being supervised. I don't think that's necessarily a great reason to harm all of high school students and make it so that we're working against their biology. But that was the consequences of this discussion in my school district. I know we started at 8 a.m., which seems very early, but my high school started at 7:20 a.m. And if you had to catch the bus, you had to be up. My bus stop was like at 6:30 in the morning or something. So 8 a.m. really isn't too bad. So you're very fortunate in that case. People who are sleep deprived can still perform mental complex tasks, but they increase the number of errors and they decrease in their attention and alertness. There's a classic study where they had people watching a clock, and they told them that they wanted them to watch the second hand, and every once in a while the second hand would jump a second. So instead of like going from 3 to 4, go to 3 to 5. And they had to alert, like essentially mark down the number of times that this happened. People who were sleep deprived, they made more errors, and then they essentially had a shorter span of time that they could actually focus on this task. Especially things that are very monotonous, they tend to get dropped first by our brain. Micro sleeps are brief shifts in brain activity that are similar to patterns of sleep. Your eyes can be open, but you can essentially have shifted into a sleep pattern even with your eyes open. I've actually done this standing up when I was a lifeguard. It was very, very bad. I was very tired that morning. Thankfully, I had some awesome coworkers who went and got me coffee. For dangerous work such as factory work or air traffic control, people who are, 18-wheeler, truck drivers on the road, this is really unsafe. And so they've put in quite a few rules and regulations into like how long these people can work these shifts without having to take a break. So there's a certain number of hours that truck drivers can drive before they're mandated to take a break. They can't just drive for 24 hours. They can only drive for a certain amount of time. Factory workers, air traffic control is very, very strict. Pilots, they have very strict limitations for this. Even things like doctors and nurses, residents, like it used to be that people would work like 100 hours straight, especially in residency, like they would just kill them. But now we've seen that by forcing doctors and residents and nurses to do this is that they increase medical errors and people are more likely to die when their doctor is sleep deprived because they're not making the correct decisions. So there's been a lot of pushback, and some regulations have been put in place, although I don't think it's quite enough. Even if your eyes are open, you can still sleep for a few seconds. And again, that's part of those micro sleeps. 15% of car crashes are caused by sleepiness, which is pretty much, I think it's as much, if not more, than is caused by drunk drivers. So it is very, very dangerous. There's also what's called sleep deprivation psychosis. This is a major disruption of mental and emotional functioning that can be brought about by sleep loss. And sleep deprivation can trigger underlying mental health concerns. So if a person has tendencies for bipolar or psychotic disorders, sleep deprivation can cause those things to essentially get triggered or become worsened. So sleep is incredibly important for that. Sleep patterns. So sleep rhythms are usually quite steady, and they'll continue even when clocks and light-dark cycles are removed. So there was a researcher who went down into a cave, and he was not exposed to artificial light, or I think maybe he had lights, but there was no sunlight. So essentially he had made his own schedule. And I don't think he had a clock, but I think he had a way to like mark like some sort of equipment that would like he just press the button like, okay, I'm going to sleep, and then like this is what time I woke up, and that would mark the time for the researchers outside the cave. And what they saw is that he kept a pretty normal cycle, but the cycle turned out, instead of being a 24-hour cycle, it was more like a 28 to 30-hour cycle. So essentially those things get lengthened. But for us, because we're here on the surface, light and dark helps mark our time and ties our light-dark cycle to day and night, which is really helpful for us. So one of the things that they recommend if you're having trouble waking up is go outside, get some sunlight. So walk your dog, eat your breakfast outside on the patio, do something to help get some sunlight on your face and especially into your eyes. And then at night, keep things dim and allow your brain to realize that it's nighttime. One of the ways that they're actually helping people who work on submarines, because of course they're under the surface, they're not going to get the natural sunlight, is they're making these like glasses, and they look crazy. They look like rave glasses. And they shine this blue light toward the person's eyes instead of out. And then they wear them for like 10 minutes after they wake up. And essentially it cues their brain to thinking, oh, it's really bright, it must be daytime, and then they can work their shift. Because if they're not getting this normal light-dark cycle, especially if they're working what is nighttime, even though they're under the water, they don't know what the light is outside. It helps like cue their brain to turn on and like to wake up and operate more functionally, which is really important, especially if you're working in a submarine. It's one of those things that they really recommend is really making sure that you're getting some light. And that's actually one of the things that happens when we do the daylight savings time crap, where they switch the hour on us. It'll end up being really dark in the morning driving to work, and we actually see an increase in car accidents when we do those switches. Or it'll be really dark in the evenings, and that causes a whole host of problems as well. They really need to get rid of that, but, we're waiting on Congress on that one. So the normal range of sleep. So some people can do okay on 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night, but that is extremely rare. I believe one of the people who could do that was Margaret Thatcher. She was the Prime Minister of the UK. She was one of the people who could just go on like no sleep. But she's very rare. Actually, her husband used to like force her to go to bed every once in a while. Some people really need 9 or more hours, especially in adolescence. It's not uncommon for people to need more than 9 hours in order to feel well rested. The typical amount of sleep necessary is 7 to 9 hours of sleep for adults, but teenagers, scientists recommend 9.5 hours, and even more if you're an athlete. The number I've heard thrown around is an extra 10 minutes per mile that you've run. So maybe like every, 10 or 15 minutes of activity, you need another 10 minutes of sleep. So keep that in mind for those of you who are trying to figure out your schedule. Really make sure you're protecting that time. And I know you're like, I barely got 4 hours. But it's really, really important to try your best. And what I've seen is that my most successful students over the past couple of years, the ones who are really able to do well in school are the ones who prioritize sleep, who get on average 7 to 9 hours a night. It is possible if you are managing your time in class to get work done, and aftercare, after school, getting work done. I know there's going to be days where you have extra projects or you have a game or a meet that goes really late, but making sure that you prioritize getting that sleep will really, really help out. I have students who can do it. They get their 8 hours a night, and they are so much happier, more stable, and more relaxed in school, and they're not being balls of stress like some of you guys. Sleep and aging. Older adults need on average 6 hours of sleep, so you actually need less as you get older. Infants need a whole lot, like 20 or more hours. So it kind of goes in a curve. You have a really high amount of sleep as an infant, goes down a little bit into childhood, goes back up in adolescence, a little blip there, and then it goes down in later adulthood. So again, adults typically need 7 to 9 hours, like your parents and myself. But then older adults, maybe your grandparents or older relatives, they could probably get by on 6 hours of sleep. So stages of sleep. So one of the reasons that scientists think that we actually do sleep is to repair and restore our body. So this is called the repair and restorative theory of sleep. So this proposes that lowering body and brain activity and our metabolism during sleep can help conserve energy and lengthen life. We also believe that it helps repair the body as well as the brain and the immune system. And these have all been shown scientifically to occur. That all happens during sleep and allows our body to essentially regenerate itself. There's a lot of stuff that happens during sleep that doesn't happen any other time of the day. We kind of mention it in chapter 2, that our brain has to kind of absorb damaged cells, all those extra neurotransmitters that get buffed out of the synapse. And that actually happens during sleep. So our brain actually kind of shrinks a little bit while we're sleeping, while we're resting. And all those glial cells have a chance to kind of scoop up all that stuff that maybe was damaged. We also have our cerebral spinal fluid that can kind of go in and wash between those cells. And it allows our brain to begin to repair itself and keep itself healthy. A lot of stuff happens within our nervous system while we're sleeping that cannot happen during daytime. Part of that has to do with memory consolidation, which we're going to get to. Scientists who study the stages of sleep use what's called an electroencephalogram, the EEG. It's a device that's designed to detect, amplify, and record electrical activity in the brain and other parts of your body. EEGs are also used for like heart measurements and things like that. All they have to do is put a couple of little like sticker things on your head, and they can measure your brain activity. And what they're looking for is the type of brain waves. So we have beta waves and alpha waves. We also have delta waves and some other ones we'll talk about later. So beta waves are small, fast brain waves associated with being awake and alert. They're like choppy, they're all over the place, really quick. Alpha waves are longer, slower brain waves, and they're associated with relaxation and falling asleep. Once we get into deep sleep, we see delta waves. These are these huge, long waves that are happening in our brain, and it's this deep pattern of relaxation. And we have different sleep stages, and these are identified by patterns of brain waves and behavioral changes. We also see theta waves, which we're going to look at in a few slides. So here's kind of a way to remember the different types of brain waves. So beta stands for bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in this. Alpha means you're almost asleep. Theta is a teeny tiny bit asleep. And then delta is down for the count. So these are essentially how you go to beta, alpha, theta, delta. It's not in alphabetical order. But beta, alpha, theta, delta. So you can see beta is awake and delta is very, very asleep. So in our first stage of sleep, we have what's called light sleep. This is when our heart rate begins to slow, breathing becomes more irregular, our muscles relax, and we may have what's called a hypnic jerk. And you probably have felt this before. This is when your muscles like twitch, you feel like you're falling, or that you're like, something happened really quickly and maybe you're getting stabbed. And it's like just as you're falling asleep, like your body just twitches. It might be just a leg or an arm, but your whole body could also twitch. And this is called a hypnic jerk. This is perfectly normal, happens to almost everyone. In stage 2, we begin to see what's called sleep spindles. These are short bursts of distinctive brain wave activity, and it prevents arousal from external stimuli. This is our first stage of true sleep. So this is if you have the TV on or you're listening to something while you're falling asleep, this is when like you're not going to be noticing anything going on the TV anymore, and that's stage 2. In stage 3, we have deeper slow wave sleep. So we begin to see these delta waves, these large, slow, consistent brain waves, and we see this deep loss of consciousness, and then deep sleep. It's the deepest level. It takes about an hour to get there. It's a deep state of oblivion, and if you're woken up, you're just confused, and you may not remember what woke you up. You're just like, what happened? Now, the interesting thing is that depending on what stage you're in, okay, so it also changes throughout the night. So you start off, in stage 1, you go to stage 2, 3, 4, takes about an hour to get there. You actually go back to 3, 2, and then you go back down. And you see these waves over the course of the night. But in the first couple of hours, you spend a lot of time in stage 4 and stage 3, but then you kind of get shallower waves as you get closer to waking up in the morning. I'm going to go through that in a little bit more in a second, but here's kind of what these different waves look like. So alpha waves, these short, very quick waves. First stage, the theta waves, is these sleep spindles, these big delta waves. And then we're talking about REM, or dreaming sleep, in just a second. And here's kind of how your night goes. So REM, talk about really quickly. REM stands for rapid eye movement. This is when you're dreaming. It looks almost like you're awake, but you're actually still asleep. So they put that above all those. You're really in deep sleep, but your brain is active like it's almost awake. So you see these deep kind of channels in the first few hours of sleep, and then they begin to kind of get shallower throughout the night. You can actually get alarm clocks that will kind of use this. So they typically won't actually have an EEG, but they can kind of see based off your movement at night. Usually you have to have like some sort of thing under your bed, or they actually have like basic EEG systems that you can have at home. Little headbands that go on your head. But they'll actually wake you up when you're in these higher levels of these sleep patterns, because that's when it's going to be less disruptive for you to wake up. So if your alarm has ever gone off and you're just like, oh, I guess I'm awake now, that's probably because it went off while you were in a really high stage of sleep. But if your alarm goes off and like it's like waking you up from the dead, that's probably because you were in a really deep state of sleep when that happened. So these special alarm clocks will actually wake you up when you're in a higher stage of sleep instead of a lower one. You typically give it a range for what time you'd like to wake up. So say like you have to be up by 6, but anytime between like 5:30 and 6 is okay with you. It'll wake you up when you're in your lightest moment of sleep within that window. Older adults have more disrupted sleep patterns, just because they don't have quite the same restorative needs as you guys as adolescents do. Okay, so sleep and memory. So during the lighter cycles of sleep, we see rapid eye movement, and that is the swift eye movements during sleep. So if you ever see someone whose eyes are twitching back and forth, or maybe your dog, they're twitching their legs and everything, that is what we consider rapid eye movement. And that's when we actually get dreaming that occurs. We see fast, irregular EEG patterns. It actually looks like stage 1, and the brain is just as active during REM sleep as when you're awake. So that's why it looks like this. It's like they're showing it almost as awake, even though you are actually deep asleep. NREM sleep, or non-REM sleep, is non-rapid eye movement sleep that's characteristic of stages 2, 3, and 4. And we cycle between these things as we're sleeping. And this helps in memory formation and calming of the brain. So NREM sleep has one function, REM sleep has another function, but they're both very important. So the function of NREM, so NREM sleep is dream-free most of the time, about 90%. This is most prevalent after physical exertion, and it may actually help the body recover from fatigue. So if you're an athlete, you're probably going to spend a lot of time in NREM sleep. This also helps calm the brain in order to begin memory consolidation, and it helps refresh the brain after the day's activity. So this supports or sorts out important information for storage from unimportant information, which can be thrown away or forgotten. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out and the little marbles come down when they put Joy to sleep, or not Joy, Riley to sleep, and Joy's watching essentially these memories on a movie projector, but you see how the memories kind of go down, they go down to long-term memory storage. That's essentially what they're showing is this memory consolidation process that's happening during sleep. So REM sleep, on the other hand, helps sharpen and complete the memory consolidation process. We need both the NREM and the REM sleep to form memories. Daytime stress can increase REM sleep, so death in the family, work troubles, relationship conflicts. I know for me, the first few weeks of school, I get some stress dreaming that occurs. When I started my last job, that place was really bad with technology, and like their printers never worked, and I really needed printers. And so I'd have dreams every night about like struggling to find a working printer and having to go all over the place minutes before class started so I could print out stuff for my students. It was just so stressful, and it drove me crazy for several weeks at night. Um, REM sleep also helps sort and retain memories, especially when it comes to problem solving. So they'll actually, in research, they'll have people figure out or they'll have them try to solve a difficult problem. They may or may not figure it out. Then they have them go to sleep, and when they wake up, they're much more likely to have solved the problem versus people who didn't get that restorative sleep. So we actually see better memory after studying if people have had a chance to go into REM sleep, and REM sleep takes several hours to achieve. So you really have to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time for that consolidation process to occur. So if you're awoken during REM sleep, typically people will report having vivid dreams. People will often not remember their dreams the next day. So if I ask you if you dreamed last night, you're probably going to say no or maybe. But we all dream almost every night, typically between 5 and 7 dreams each. But it's something that we just don't usually remember because we're just going back into a sleep cycle and we're not going to consolidate that memory for that dream. Some of the eye movements that happen during REM sleep correspond to the dream's content. So if a person is dreaming about a tennis match, you'll actually see their eyes going back and forth like they're watching a tennis ball move across the court. Brain regions responsible for imagery and emotion are active during REM sleep. So we actually see the parts of the brain that would be responsible for seeing things around them and being emotionally engaged are going to be active during the dreams. The body does become very still, which is a phenomenon called REM sleep paralysis. So sometimes, though, that can fail and limbs will thrash around and attack other people or your pillow or the person next to you. And this is called a REM behavioral disorder. But the sleep paralysis can persist when you're woken up or woken. So this is very frightening. And this probably has happened to some of you where you're laying in bed and you feel like you can't move. And a lot of people will feel like there's something pressing on their chest, like a demon or like a dark angel or something like that. And it's like the last remnants of sleep and dreaming, and then you have that sleep paralysis. You feel like you can't move your body, and it's quite terrifying. So what they recommend is that you twitch a muscle, typically like a finger or like a toe, and once you can move one of those little muscles, essentially like the spell is broken, and your body realizes that, oh, I'm awake now, and everything goes back to normal. So REM sleep paralysis can cause this sleep paralysis once you've woken up, and it's quite scary, but it's nothing wrong, but it happens to a lot of people. So just take that second, calm down, and try to move one little muscle. So sleep disorders and disturbances. So sleep isn't always very simple. Things like artificial lighting, busy schedules, TV, smoking, drinking, and overstimulation can contribute to sleep loss. So who of you actually gets 7 hours a night? Ask yourself. I know I did last night, but it is summer and I'm enjoying my sleep. So, insomnia disorder. So, 40 million Americans have what's called chronic insomnia. So, insomnia is the difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep. 20 million of these individuals have occasional problems with sleeping. 40 million Americans have chronic insomnia, so long lasting insomnia. Another 20 million have occasional problems with sleeping. Insomnia is really harmful to work, health, and relationships because if you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to be your best self. There are two types of insomnia. We have temporary and chronic. So temporary means, it goes on for a few weeks, few months. Chronic means it lasts for several months to years. Excessive mental worry, such as, or activities such as worrying and frustration about falling asleep, then leads to anger and frustration, but not being able to fall asleep. And then, because you can't fall asleep, then you're worried. And then, it's like this terrible vicious cycle where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed, but I'm not gonna be able to fall asleep. And then because you're worrying about not being able to fall asleep, you can't fall asleep because worrying makes it harder for you to fall asleep. But then you're now worrying about not getting enough rest, and then you're gonna be terrible the next day, and then you're worrying more, which is causing you to not sleep more. So it's a terrible vicious cycle. So it's best to avoid this cycle by just not fighting it. If you can't fall asleep, get up, do something useful until you feel tired again. So get up, read a book, enjoy your history textbook, maybe do some math problems. Don't just lay in bed and get frustrated with yourself. There's also a lot of medications people can take for insomnia. Lunesta is one of them. What's the big one that everyone takes? I can't remember it right now. Ambien. That's the name of it. Ambien is the big one that a lot of people have heard of. But what can happen is that if you start taking sleep pills, is you get what's called drug dependency insomnia. So when you stop taking the pills, because they're not supposed to be taken for a long period of time, your body's so used to having that additional aid that it now can't fall asleep without it. And so you get sleep loss caused by the withdrawal of the sleeping pills. So sleeping pills don't solve the problem. They just cause what's called rebound insomnia. And there's a high likelihood of side effects, including impaired judgment, amnesia, depression, etc. This is actually a big problem with things like Ambien. People were taking it and then like, okay, I'm going to wait until I get tired to go to bed. When I get sleepy, I'll just head over there. Until then, I'm just going to play around with the computer. Well, what happens is like your brain like begins to like go into sleep mode even though they're still on the computer and they don't realize it. So I have friends who have had this happen where like they end up ordering all kinds of stuff on Amazon and didn't even realize it. And like the 2 days later, like all these packages show up. It's like an Ambien shopping spree. But that's about as mild as it gets. There's a lot of people who had complete memory loss, people who would still be asleep, or their brain would still kind of be asleep when they were awoken the next morning because the drug hadn't worn off, and they would drive to work and have no idea how they got there, or people who would wake up and then drive in the middle of the night. It was pretty nasty. So they've actually cut down the dosage that's recommended for women because it turns out women metabolize the drug slower than men. So like they cut the dosage in half for women, but it's still not something to take unless necessary. There are more natural options such as melatonin, but even that can also cause this rebound insomnia and this withdrawal. But melatonin is a hormone that your brain naturally produces in your pineal gland to help you fall asleep when it gets to be evening time, and you can get that over the counter. But be judicious, in your use of that. And then, of course, ask your parents before you start taking anything like that. But it also needs to be taken with caution. So instead of medications, there are some behavioral remedies for insomnia. And this works well, too, just if you're having occasional sleeplessness or stress. So try to use what's called stimulus control. So go to sleep using a regular schedule. Get up and go to bed at the exact same time every day, even on the weekends. So if you go to bed at 11 and you wake up at 6 for school, do the same thing on the weekends, and that way you're going to help being that normal cycle. If you let yourself stay up till 4 a.m. on the weekends and sleep till noon, then when Monday rolls around, you're going to have a really hard time switching back. Also avoid doing anything in bed but sleeping or marital relations. But don't do anything else in your bed. Don't eat in your bed. Don't watch TV. Don't play on your phone. Don't play on your iPad because your brain's going to get in the habit of doing that other thing, and it's not going to recognize that sleep is for bed is for sleep. You need to kind of keep that area controlled. Also, this is called sleep restriction. So if you can't fall asleep, don't sleep in the next day to accommodate. Don't take a nap. Restrict your sleep to normal bedtimes. This is something that a lot of people will do. Is like, oh man, could not fall asleep last night. Let me take this nap, and I take a 2-hour nap from 4 to 6. But then, of course, when nighttime comes around, you just had a nap, so you are not going to be tired, and you're not going to be able to sleep, and then the whole cycle starts again. So you got to make sure that you really just kind of power through that day, and then get to bed maybe a little bit earlier or at your normal bedtime. You can also use what's called paradoxical intention. So try to remove the pressure of trying to fall asleep. Just keep your eyes open in the dark and try to stay awake. Look at the clock, stare at something in your room, stare at the window, just do something really boring and without any light, and try to just stay awake. And oftentimes your brain will fall asleep. Relaxation, so use progressive muscle relaxation, use meditation, write down your worries and the tasks for the next day before bedtime. I know for me, I always have a list of things I have to do the next day, and oftentimes I'll be worried about forgetting them, and so that worrying about forgetting them leads me to not be able to sleep. So for me, I take out my phone or a piece of paper and I'll write down my to-do list, and that way it's out of my head and I know I'm not going to forget anything, and I can then relieve that worrying. Progressive muscle relaxation is also great. So if you're laying in bed, focus on your toes and make sure that they're relaxed and comfortable. And then the bottom of your foot, make sure that's relaxed and comfortable. The top of your foot, and then you go all the way up through your entire body. For me, also counting backwards from 200 by threes or something. It's enough of a mental challenge that it focuses me without overstimulating me. And that helps me fall asleep. Exercise is really good, but it can be best to do it earlier in the day to help tire out your body, and then also it allows your body temperature to come down. If you exercise and then go straight to bed, your body temperature will be higher, and it can make it harder for you to fall asleep. That's why a shower or a bath before bed is good, because you artificially raise your body temperature, but then it really drops down afterwards because it's gone from the warmth of the bath down really cool afterwards. Food intake, eat starches, especially before bed. Not a huge meal, not like a Thanksgiving kind of meal, but a little snack can be good to help your body kind of overcome maybe any midnight, snackiness that you want to do. Stimulant avoidance. So no coffee or cigarettes, but even alcohol should be avoided for best sleep quality. You guys all know about, coffee having caffeine, but so does chocolate, so hot chocolate, tea, sodas, energy drinks, all that kind of stuff. Be really cautious about eating a lot of that anytime in the evening, or even after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Be careful. And then blue screens. So any screen that's digital, so your phone, your iPad, TV, computer screen, they emit blue light. And blue light is essentially the underlying tone of the sun. And so your body thinks that that's actually the sun, and that it's daytime and it should be awake. So if you're trying to fall asleep, remove all digital devices for at least an hour before bed. And I know that's really hard because a lot of you guys like to, troll social media before you fall asleep. But you're essentially alerting your brain that it's daytime, so you should be awake. It makes it harder for you to fall asleep, not to mention the excitement of Snapchatting your friends at 11:30 at night. But there's a couple ways you can kind of make this a little bit better. There's these iFlux or nighttime settings you can put on your phone. Sometimes you can do this with your TV, depending on the type of TV you have. That can help. It's not 100%. You can also get glasses that block blue lights, so it makes it a little bit easier on your eyes even throughout the day. I actually have a pair of these glasses that I use when I'm working on my computer that allows me to kind of filter out this nasty blue light. It's hard on your eyes anyway. It can cause headaches, but especially in the evening, these screens should be avoided. Even on dark settings, it's still emitting this light that's tricking your brain to thinking you're awake. So removing the blue light is one of those things that I think is really critical, especially for teenagers, because you guys use your phones so often. Sleepwalking, sleep talking, and sleep sex. Yes, you can sleep and do a lot of other things. So some people will walk, talk, drive a car, cook, play instruments, eat, and yes, have sex in their sleep. The technical term for sleepwalkers are somnambulists. So somnambulism is sleepwalking. They're really interesting. They have their eyes open. They avoid obstacles, but they'll do really weird things like urinate in odd places, move things around, walk outside. There's a video from the movie Step Brothers on the playlist you should check out. It's really funny. It's extreme, but it's what sleepwalking kind of looks like. Again, their eyes are usually open, so that way it allows them to avoid obstacles, but not always. There's a old wives' tale that if you wake up someone who's sleepwalking, they're gonna have a heart attack and die, but that's not the case. But the best thing to do is if you see them, just put them back in bed, guide them back to bed, and typically they'll fall right back asleep. It actually, sleepwalking is pretty common with children. Typically, they'll grow out of it before adolescence, but not always. There are adults who will sleepwalk. This will typically occur during stage 3, not REM sleep, same thing with sleep talking, but it is part of stage 3 most typically for people. Sleep apnea is a repeated interruption of breathing during sleep. Maybe your parents or grandparents have this. If any of them use a machine to breathe at night, this is because of sleep apnea. So people with sleep apnea, what's going on is that when they're laying there, their tongue kind of falls back into their throat and it blocks their breathing, their air passage. So they'll snore a little bit and then they kind of stop. And it sounds like they're just quietly sleeping. Then all of a sudden they do this big loud snore and they wake up. They don't really wake up completely, but they're kind of like aroused. They're woken up a little bit by their body, and they go back to sleep. And they'll do this over and over again throughout the night. So breathing will stop anywhere from 20 seconds to up to 2 minutes during sleep. So as the body is sleeping, it realizes it needs oxygen. So the body like stirs itself awake just enough to get a nice deep breath, which is usually get that really loud snore, and then they fall back to sleep. They don't even realize that they're doing this. They don't realize that their body is being woken up by itself in order to get oxygen. But because their body is continually like staying in this really light stage of sleep, they're actually not getting restorative sleep. This is happening hundreds of times all throughout the night, and it really is disruptive, and it causes a whole host of health issues. They're always tired. It stresses out their body, especially their heart. It causes increases in blood pressure. It can cause strokes and heart attacks. It's a really nasty disorder. It's not just the same as regular snoring. It's this pattern of holding their breath and then like this really loud snore to kind of wake up and get air. In order to treat this, you really can't treat it completely, but you can reduce the problem. Typically, this is more common in people who are overweight. So if they lose weight, it will take some of the stress off their body while they're sleeping. There are surgeries that can be done, although they're not always effective. My dad has severe sleep apnea. He actually had 3 surgeries to try to correct this, and it didn't work for him. You can also get a mouth guard that you get, like essentially it's a top and bottom mouth guard, and the bottom clicks to the top of it, and it kind of pulls the jaw forward. And by pulling the jaw forward, it opens up that airway while they're sleeping. That worked for my dad for years, but then it messed up the ligaments in his jaw, and his jaw ended up like kind of being like stuck forward, and it messed up his speech a little bit. So now he uses what's the most common treatment, which is called a CPAP, or it's continuous positive airway pressure machine, and it's a mask that essentially forces air into the person's airways. That sounds really violent, but it's actually not. They're very quiet, very small machines. They can have masks that either go straight out the front that cover the mouth and the nose. Some of them just cover the mouth. My dad's just covers his nose because he breathes through his nose while he's sleeping. And then like the tube comes up from the top of the head so that way he can roll over and not be like tangled up in these tubes at night. It is kind of weird at first. It takes some getting used to, but there's a whole variety of different masks and different ways, different setups that people can use. It's a little bit of a hassle for travel, especially if you wanted to go, really rustic camping. I think you can get battery packs for them, but you still have to bring it along. And the machine has to be, or the tubes and everything has to be clean because you're adding water and, things that are going into your lungs, and you want to make sure that's all really clean. There's all kinds of different cleaning equipment and stuff that you can get for that. It's definitely something that if you have a family member who's a really loud snorer, especially irregular snoring, I would recommend they get it checked out. They can typically do at-home sleep studies. You take a machine home, it measures your heart rate, and they usually will look at your heart rate on your wrist, pulse. They do like a thing on your chest so they can see what the activity is of your heart, And then I think they do like one or two EEG kind of things and records throughout the night to see what stage of sleep you're in. My husband did one. It was really basic. It didn't take too long. He just hated having all the wires on him for a night, but it's not terrible. So get them checked out. Another very morbid topic, SIDS, also known as sudden infant death syndrome. This is a sudden and unexplained death of an apparently healthy infant. It's also known as crib death. This is due in part to a weak arousal reflex. So little babies, if they get their face pushed in a weird way or they just stop breathing, their body, unlike an adult, which is going to wake them up to get a breath of air, they just won't have that reflex. It's just they're too young, they're too weak in order to wake themselves up. It's more common in babies who have health concerns, a cough, if they were born prematurely, or if they've choked. There's some risk relating to those things, of course. It is the leading cause of death in children from ages 1 month to 1 year of age. It is one of those things that frightens parents who have young babies really badly. Babies who are at risk can get a monitor from their doctor that will measure respiration and heart rate. It like wraps around their chest and will alert with an alarm that they've stopped breathing or that their heart has stopped. There are versions of this that are like, oh, buy it on Amazon, versions of it that are like in a sock or things you can get like for the baby's chest. But those aren't recommended by doctors. They're typically going to cause false alarms more often than not. And then if there really was an emergency, the parents are less likely to react to that appropriately. They're also not like approved by any sort of governing agency, so you don't know really how safe they are. To prevent SIDS, there has been this big campaign called the Back to Sleep campaign. So babies should always, always, always be placed on their back unless otherwise directed by their doctor because of a specific health concern. All infants should be placed on their back and their crib should be prepared safely. So what that means is that they should be sleeping on their own surface. They shouldn't be sleeping with other children. They shouldn't be sleeping on a couch or on a chair with their parents. The crib should have nothing in it except for the mattress, which has a tightly fitted sheet on it. Typically, they zipper around on the back where they somehow are secured. There should not be loose blankets. There should be no crib bumpers, which are the little things that go around the edge of the crib. Even the mesh ones are still a hazard. They should be in snug-fitting clothing that isn't like big and loose on them that could get in their mouth. They should not have any stuffed animals in their crib. So all those really pretty pictures that you see of cribs with all these like fluffy little things all over the place should not be anywhere near the crib. They also need to be careful to be away from curtains, pull cords for blinds, and things like that. So all those things could cause the child to suffocate or be choked. Children should also not be wearing jewelry while they're in bed. So the little gold necklaces or bracelets should not be on the child while they're sleeping. The amber teething necklaces should not be on the child while they're sleeping. There's absolutely no evidence that those things work. It's all pseudoscience. And they need to just be careful. Now, some parents will make this decision to co-sleep with their child, meaning they have the baby in the bed with them, but they also need to take extra precautions. So there shouldn't be a mattress topper on their beds, like the big fluffy mattress pads or memory foam pads shouldn't be on the top of the mattress. There shouldn't be a lot of blankets. There shouldn't be a lot of pillows around the child. They make these little like foam, like little like wedge things like a baby could sleep in, and then like it kind of has like little like bumpers on the side to keep the parent from rolling on them. But there have been cases where parents have rolled on top of their children and smothered them, or the blankets and pillows that the parents use have smothered the baby. So it can be dangerous to co-sleep. If it's done correctly, it is very safe, but if it's done incorrectly, it is very unsafe. Parents also, if they're on any sort of sleep medication that can make them drowsy, or alcohol or illicit substances, should not co-sleep with their children, of course. When they look at SIDS cases, they say, this is according to our textbook, that 15% of SIDS cases are caused by accidental suffocation on clothing and bedding, strangulation, cords, and jewelry, or overlaying, which is a parent or sibling rolling on top of the infant and smothering them. These are all, of course, preventable. But I've read other articles from people who do the medical examination after a child has died, and they said it's actually more like 90% of cases that are caused by these things, and they will typically just name it as SIDS, like, oh, unexplained, because they don't want to place the blame on the child, if you, or on the parent. If you tell the parent, oh, it was, your baby died from suffocation because of the bedding, or that they were rolled on top of, or whatever else, you're essentially placing the blame on that parent, and that's a really difficult thing for police and medical examiners to do. So oftentimes they'll call it SIDS, even if they know that the child's death was caused through strangulation. So, it's just something to be really mindful of, especially if you have younger siblings, if you are babysitting, if you have nieces and nephews, and then eventually children of your own. Please be very, very vigilant. There's always the old grandma who's like, well, back in my day, we did all this, this, and this, and we had pillows and blankets and all this other stuff. Say no. Show them the regulations or the guidelines that are used today. There's a lot of really good videos on the internet you should check out. But please make sure that you're protecting the children in your life, because this is really, really important. You don't want to be a person who finds a baby dead in their crib. That's just a horrible way to start your day. All right, dreams, and a more fun topic. So most people dream 4 to 5 times a night, but they usually only remember the dream if they're woken up during this dream. We have what's called REM rebound, which is a occurrence of extra rapid eye movement sleep following REM sleep deprivation. So in this one study, this is just awful. This would drive you crazy. They had a bunch of people who were sleeping, and every time they started REM sleep, they woke them up. And as the days went by, their bodies would more quickly and more frequently go into REM sleep, essentially in order to catch up, to make sure that they would get it. So if you've had a couple of days of disrupted sleep, you're probably more likely going to be falling asleep quickly. We also have different theories of what dreams mean. According to Freud, who had what we call the psychodynamic approach, dreams represent internal conflicts and unconscious forces. They have hidden symbolic meanings, typically relating to sex and aggression. So if you dream of, a train going into a tunnel, it's a penis going into a vagina. Like, that's just Freud. That's his craziness. If you're holding a sword, it's a penis. If you're holding a pen, it's a penis. That's just Freud. The activation synthesis hypothesis says that dreams content is affected by motor commands in the brain, and they're not being carried out. The dreams themselves are meaningless. Essentially, it's just like these random firings that are going on, but it's just not being acted out. The neurocognitive dream theory states that dreams have much more in common with waking thoughts and emotion. There's no hidden meaning. They're just kind of playing through things throughout the day, trying to solve problems, and then kind of be ready for the next day's activities. All right, so we're going to stop here, and our next section is on drug-altered consciousness.